A parenting plan can also be really effective for younger children where you don't yet know what their routine or stages of development are going to look like. So we tend to want to try and avoid locking really young children into court orders because you just don't know what their personalities or health or stages of development will look like. So a parenting plan can be really good where they will benefit from that flexibility. Then we have our court orders, which can be done by consent just on the papers between the parties, and that can be for parenting and property matters. And then we can also look at things like child support agreements in a more limited or a more binding capacity. So there's lots of different documents we can do. There's also financial agreements which are not done through the court. So it can get a little bit confusing sometimes when people come in and say, what are my options? Because we do have so many, but it's a matter of working out what's going to suit that individual family, what's best for the children. Do they need that flexibility? Do they need something really concrete, you know, and legally enforceable? So just working out what is it that this person or this family actually needs, what's going to be the best document, and then working out how to work best with the other side, usually a lawyer, but sometimes self-represented parties, to get that drawn up.
So if people reach agreement, it's not actually necessary for them to go to court and go through that additional stress of appearing in court.
No, absolutely not. So consent orders can be done just on the papers. So you fill out the paperwork. It does still go to court. So it gets sent into court. It gets reviewed by a judicial registrar. So they look at the orders to make sure it's still fair, which just means we have to give them all of that information for them to still be able to make that decision. But there's no need for a court appearance for the parties, which can be really stressful for people to go through on top of their separation. So there's lots of ways that parties can resolve it just on the papers without having to step foot in a courtroom.
The signs tend to be, I think as Kate was alluding to, that they're developmental, so we expect to see different things at different developmental stages. Initially, you're going to have some teething problems. You're going to have some teething problems. So you will expect a fair bit of disruption to the family system and to the individuals within that system when the separation and kind of the news that the family is dissolving first surfaces. And as that starts to become a reality, you're going to expect a lot of those teething problems. So there's going to be disruption in routine, sometimes behavioural regression, sometimes acting out. And that'll probably last for about 2 to 3 months, or while ever that system is kind of stabilising. But once the new systems start to establish and we start to get a bit more of an understanding of what the reality looks like moving forward, and the players in those systems start to come, the parents predominantly, then we'll see the kids hopefully starting to kind of drop off a little bit. The problems that you would be expecting for an infant would be things like just general fussiness and irritability. So if you think about a baby that's unwell or in a situation where the family is quite stressed, those are the types of behaviours you're going to see. As we move on to toddlers, we're going to see some regression behaviours. So any kind of toileting, they might regress. Speech, they might lose a little bit of that for a while. And the other thing that will happen is your kind of normal developmental separation anxiety that occurs, kind of that preference for the primary attachment figure or clinginess, is likely going to be exacerbated. As you move towards preschool ages, we're going to be expecting similar sorts of things but more tantrums. And also the children at that age are starting to develop this kind of idea of concreteness. So when the other parent isn't there, they're aware of that. So there's going to be a lot of questions about where is mum or dad, why aren't they here, when are they coming back? Again, this will continue into your school age children, but we start to see some academic problems. So children's performance in school will change. They might start acting out socially. They may start to withdraw. And then once we start getting to the more teenage years, similar sorts of things, but this is where we get a more emotional flavour to what's going on. Teenagers tend to have a greater understanding of the permanence of the situation and the various parts that are in place. So they might start to lay blame or de-idealise the parents or both parents. They might try to get both parents back together. There might be a fair bit of arguing, particularly if there's ever new partners that come on the scene. And the other thing that we do see is a slight spike in suicidal thoughts and behaviours, which again is usually just a communication that these young people are really struggling. parents trying to badmouth or belittle the other parent and trying to create sides is hugely problematic. I think one of the key things to remember in that situation is the little people that you are dealing with inherently are 50% of the person that you're breaking up with, both in their genetic makeup and a lot of their behaviours. So they are going to always have a part of them that relates and identifies with the other parent. So when you engage in that belittling talk or the bad mouthing of the other parent, as much as you might feel that it's justified or realistic about what's going on, actually what happens is the child starts to really have no choice but to view that part of themselves that they identify with that other parent in a really negative way. So it can create some really difficult self-concepts for the child, and that's a really hard one to deal with. The other thing that's tricky is when parents pass messages between the kids and use them as a conduit for information or spying. So it's just kind of taking, I would say, taking anything that should remain at adult levels and bringing the kids up into that. That's when we see big problems.
I should add as a caveat that in some cases you do need the court's help. There are cases that aren't suitable for mediation or other types of dispute resolution, and they need a judge to help them. And that's what it's there for. The court system is there to help those people that need help. But where possible, it's not somewhere that families want to be, particularly if there's children and their parents are engaged in litigation that's going on for years. The impact on the children, as Karlye would be able to say, it's just really heartbreaking to have kids involved in that level of conflict. And you do see kids start to really suffer the consequences of that. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's their future, it's their money that's being thrown away, onto legal fees, but just the breakdown of the relationship and the fighting and how adversarial it can become. If people can avoid that, then it's absolutely going to be better for the family.
Kate, you recently qualified as a family dispute resolution practitioner and a mediator. What drove you to want to do that, and how does that fit within the family law framework?
So my desire to get the mediation qualifications came from wanting to try and help people resolve their matter without going to court. So to try and have those skills to help people work it out early on in a more collaborative way without having to resort to going to court, to litigation to sort it out.
And Kate, as a mediator, just walk us through what a mediation looks like.
So for the most part, a mediation will involve two parties after a relationship breakdown, meeting with a mediator who's an independent third party, whose goal is to try and help them to facilitate a discussion and to hold some negotiations around their matter with an end goal to try and reach an agreement between them. So usually that will occur with all of the parties meeting in the same room, and that's definitely the preference. If you can get people in there, it's much more difficult for people to take a really stubborn or entrenched view when the other person's sitting right in front of them, and it makes it much harder to lie if the other person's sitting right in front of your face. So it's always better, if there aren't family violence or safety concerns, to have people in that same room. Where you do have concerns about a power imbalance, you can have a shuttle mediation, which is where the mediator moves between different rooms, or it can be done over the phone or by video conferencing, which has become quite popular in COVID times. So usually the parties would meet with the mediator. You'll hear from both of the parties about what they want to achieve, and then the mediator will move between the two of them to try and identify key areas where there might be agreement to work on that, which is surprisingly common in a lot of family law matters, how many areas of agreement we can have, and then to try and get the parties to come up with an agreement that works for them, which we find is actually the most successful way to resolve a family law matter, is if the parties have been involved in that decision-making process themselves.
When is the best time to have mediation?
Well, it can be done at any time. It can be done right at the start of the matter. It can be done before they go to court. It can be done during court proceedings. I think it's really important that before people go to mediation, they've had the opportunity to have some legal advice so that they have a realistic expectation of what their entitlements might look like. Otherwise, it can make it really difficult if you have someone coming in realistically expecting 50% and the other person thinks they're entitled to 80%. it may not resolve at mediation. Also, where there's been disclosure. So it would be a really good idea for people in a financial matter to get some tax financial planning advice, to know their borrowing capacity before they go in, so that they can actually make realistic offers of settlement and know what they can agree to and what they can't agree to. I often also encourage people to speak with a psychologist if it's a parenting matter, or if there's a concern that they may not have processed the breakdown of the relationship, because unless people can accept that the relationship is over, it's hard for them to then move to the next stage to resolve what that breakdown looks like.
Thanks, Kate. So Karlye, what are your key takeaways for somebody who is separating from a psychological point of view?
I tend to think about families, whether they're together or separating, with the analogy of a tripod. So each leg of the tripod, two of the legs will represent the two individuals, and the third leg is the relationship. And what sits on the tripod is essentially the family or the children. Now, you need to attend to the needs of each of those structural components, and particularly the relationship. So people think that when they separate, that's it, the relationship's done. But if you've got kids, that relationship continues forever. This, even though it's not romantic anymore, this is essentially a business relationship that will last, and you're in the business of raising a child. So I think doing an inventory, and after speaking with these guys, considering what are the financial needs of each of those three components, and also for the children, what are the legal needs and what are the psychological needs. And even in the breakdown of a relationship, that's where psychologists can come in, and relationship and counselling work can be done. It's not just about keeping the relationship together, it can also be about how do we move forward in a healthy way to support the family and the children and co-parent in the most effective and respectful way possible.
Thanks, Karlye. That's really, really helpful, wonderful advice. Brett, what are your key takeaways from a financial advisor's point of view?
I agree with your comments that it should be a team effort, and I would encourage everyone not to view engaging professionals as an expense. I would say ultimately it's a cost saving as well, because getting the right advice and all your team collaborating will ultimately save you thousands of dollars, time and effort, and possibly irreparable damage to the family if it goes to World War III that Kate was describing and they're in court for 18 months.
Thank you, Brett. Kate, what are your key takeaways from a legal viewpoint?
I think to get to a stage where you're resolving a matter by consent inevitably involves some form of compromise. And I think if you can just go into it knowing you may not get your best case scenario, but it might be good enough. And if you can do it early and do it well for your children and for the family as a whole, it's priceless. You can't put a price tag on that, and it's worth every % that you might get if the matter goes ahead to litigation and you win, to resolve early, to be able to start to move forward with your life without having that cloud hanging over your head. As someone, I've been through it myself, and I say to clients, I know what it feels like on the other side, and I promise it does get better once you get past that conflict stage. If you can move past that and focus on the children, you're a winner.
Thank you, Kate. So I've got two more quick questions. Karlye, is there life after separation and divorce?
Absolutely. Life's one of those things that keeps rolling on, no matter what, even post-separation and divorce. And it can be, like anything that's difficult and challenging, there is always the possibility for there to be huge amounts of personal growth and value and accomplishment to be achieved at the other side of that. So I think, yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Karlye. Brett, is there life after separation and divorce?
Absolutely. To Kate's comments, I think I've seen the most success from people who get past the conflict stage, imagine what life can be like again, and the acceleration that happens once that change happens is amazing, to the extent that any near-death experience for their finances becomes a distant memory, and they move on happily with their new life.
Thank you, Kate.
Some of my favourite things that have happened in my career is when you have clients that have gone through a really high conflict separation and they come back in, 6-12 months later and tell you that they've fallen madly in love, and they say, oh, and I went to, you know, a wedding with the other person and we actually sat down and had a cup of tea, and you think, if this was 12 months ago, I never would have thought that that was possible, but people can recover. And it does come back to what we talked about at the start about, can you separate well? And I think if you put the effort in and the resources in the early stages and get help early and try to do it well, you have such a greater chance of separating well, but then being able to move forward and have that better life after separation if you've put the energy into doing it in a better and more productive way.
Thanks, Kate. And my last question is for you, because it's something that I find causes a lot of confusion. Is financial separation or financial orders and parenting orders the same as divorce?
No. So that's a very common misconception. We have people coming in saying, I want to get divorced, and what they actually want is to get parenting arrangements or a property settlement in place. So a divorce legally terminates the marriage. That's it. It doesn't then put in place any arrangements for the parenting or the children. So that needs to be done separately, and it can in fact be done prior to the divorce. So the divorce parties have to be separated for 12 months to apply, but you can do your financial settlement and your parenting settlement before that 12 months has expired. So you can do it before the divorce. But yeah, they're done. They can be done together, but they're often done separately.
And divorce actually starts the clock ticking on the opportunity to have a court mandated property settlement, doesn't it?
Yes. So once a divorce order becomes final, so to get divorced you have to be separated for a period of 12 months. You can then apply, and that takes between 1 to 3 months depending on the court. And then you've got 12 months to then apply for a court order for a financial matter once that divorce order is final. And for de facto couples, you've got 2 years from the date of separation to then apply to the court for an order for a financial settlement if you need it.